Is it any surprise that the global elites hate the First Amendment? Well, we'll break that down in just a moment, but BlazeTV host Auron MacIntyre joins us now. And we want to get to the hurricane because I know that you were in the thick of it for Hurricane Milton. So tell us how you braved the storm.
Well, luckily for us, this time it wasn't so bad. Back during Ian, we had a devastating time. It was a stage 4 hurricane that sat on top of us for quite a while. But this time the hurricane took a little bit of a jog north, and therefore we were spared the worst. We lost some power for a day. We had down lines in the streets. There were certainly homes that were destroyed, and there were certainly those in the storm surge that suffered the worst of it. But most of it turned north towards Sarasota and Tampa. Luckily, we have Governor DeSantis. He's very competent. He's very used to this kind of thing, responding during the storm. And so a lot of power was restored and a lot of emergency personnel were on the ground almost immediately.
And if people want to read that article, it's called No One Is Coming to Save You by Auron MacIntyre in Frontier Magazine at blazeunlimited.com. The article about the first hurricane, which I just have to get in there. Sorry. Shameless plug, Auron. It's a joke, but it's not. On to today, recent piece at theblaze.com. You write rightly that global elites hate America's First Amendment. And tell us why.
Well, John Kerry was recently at a WEF summit, and he expressed his concern that the First Amendment was getting in the way of global elites being able to mold public opinion in the United States. Across Western democracies, we've locked into the idea that popular sovereignty is the way in which you should legitimate government action. And you would think that this would put a limit on the way that the government operates. But in reality, what happens is the elites realize that they should be manipulating opinion instead. They should be driving the opinion of the people to then validate the programs that they would like to put into place. And so what many Western elites have done is simply grasp control of the communication, make sure that the opinions of the people are closely controlled, especially in places like social media, where the wrong opinion can go viral. We've seen Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom clamp down very strongly on social media, even to the point where he is arresting people for retweeting things that the government doesn't like or criticisms of their immigration policy. In the United States, that's tougher because we have the First Amendment. And while there have been public-private partnerships and the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, and others leaning on places like Twitter to create censorship, the fact that the First Amendment is still there creates a level of encumbrance that the global elites are simply not comfortable with.
Auron, it harkens back to the Constitution as a charter of negative liberties, does it not?
Absolutely. Ultimately, the founding fathers understood that we had to be animated by the desire to defend the rights of what people should be able to do and what the government should not be able to do. There's a specific way in which the American founders believe that the people and the government should interact. And they knew that ultimately, if the government was able to lean constantly on these different rights, they would be able to narrow the ability of the people to restrict the government. Now, what they may not have realized is that we would end up in this scenario where large oligarchic communications organizations monopolize the vast majority of public opinion. But luckily, we have people like Elon Musk, himself an oligarch, but one who has dedicated himself to the proposition of free speech and has used his position as a moneyed elite to go ahead and purchase a platform like Twitter. That allows a constant stream of the First Amendment, a constant stream of free speech to enter into the public discussion, despite the fact that so many of those who wish to govern us are constantly trying to clamp down on the right that the founders intended for us to have.
Yeah, Auron, it's terrifying how the state itself has started to publicly say that misinformation is a problem, right? And the private-public partnership is real. So you really do have a real state-led effort, as well as these politicians, to get rid of free speech. And there's plenty to say there. I want to move a little bit, though, and incorporate that into the next question, which is about this other piece you wrote about the progressives. I mean, they're terrified of losing control because of all these insane tactics that they used on Trump, the lockdowns, riots, everything we saw last time. So tell us about that psychology and what you think is going to happen in the next few weeks, because, you know, we're certainly sitting here asking, like a lot of people, how much time is left? Is this really going to work, right? I mean, it looks like the bottom is falling out on Kamala, but the reason that everyone's waiting for something to drop, I'm waiting for at least 3 crazy things to happen in the next few weeks, is because of what we've seen in the past. So why is that? And do you expect this to happen between now and November 4th?
Yeah, speaking of safety features that the founders built into the Constitution, one of the things they expected is that the constant shift in power, the fact that you had to peacefully transfer power to political enemies, would ultimately limit the growth of government, because who would go crazy, who would give all this power to the larger government bureaucracy if ultimately you had to hand that over to people who hate you? However, over time, the left has recognized that if they can capture institutions, even though the democratic process changes the leaders, the institutions and the people who serve them stay in power. A lot of people today recognize this as the deep state. And because they have relied on this mechanism of the deep bureaucracy to store power for them, they have gotten too confident. They started overreaching and empowering these agencies to do all kinds of wild things. And of course, Trump deranged syndrome has driven them to the place where now they have taken those powers and aimed them directly at their political enemy. As you pointed out, Donald Trump has faced the fact that they tried to bankrupt him, they tried to strip him from the ballot, they tried to put him in jail personally. And when none of that worked, finally, different people who were probably motivated by the media and Democratic politicians and their rhetoric decided to try to kill Donald Trump. When they see all that, when they realize what they've done and all this craziness that they've unleashed on Trump, that only hardens their resolve to stay in power, because they recognize that if they were in Trump's position, if they were a conservative and suddenly they receive power, they would bring vast retribution down on their enemies. They would do exactly the same thing that they've done to Trump, or even worse. And so they are terrified to hand over that power. And that's exactly why we should expect to see crazier and crazier things coming when it looks like Kamala Harris is flagging in the polls.
Yeah, and Auron, you were mentioning that like the Democrats have really kind of taken the American people hostage. So if that's the case, then how do they get out of this? How do they break free? How do they move on?
That's the huge dilemma. Of course, any hostage taker is always in this situation where you know that if you relinquish the power, if you get out of the position where you have the gun to the head of your hostage, then people will take you out. You will be in a very bad situation. They will arrest or kill you. And so the only option is to continue to escalate the situation. And I fear that's exactly what we're seeing from the left. We've already seen some Democrats say that they will not certify an election in favor of Donald Trump. We have seen media members say how they have to practice explaining why it's okay to not certify Trump, to not hand over power peaceably to Trump if he wins. These are exactly the charges that they laid at Trump's feet, that they said what he was going to do. This was what he was trying to do, what Republicans were doing. And they have already started laying the narrative groundwork for them to do exactly the thing they accused Trump of doing. So I think ultimately they are going to take this one to the wall. They are going to continue to try to push to hold on to power, even to the point of denying a certification of legitimate elections should fortification not solve the problem for them.
Auron MacIntyre, one of the great thinkers here that we have at Blaze Media. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I look at that. There's so much to take away from there. I mean, the free speech thing, right? We know that this election feels different than all of the others. There's so much at stake. This is why these last 3 weeks, people are just feeling so anxious. But free speech, they're already coming out, right? He mentioned John Kerry at the World Economic Forum stuff. They're literally telling you right now, misinformation, disinformation. Yeah. You better watch out. Well, who's going to be controlling that?
Yeah, and so it was just an event this weekend, actually. Mike Benz, who many of you have seen online, he's been a guest here, I think, at Blaze before, as going through the history of this. And it's striking because I think he's right that this really starts when Russian collusion fails. So Russian collusion, right, was the outside forces are affecting our democracy, and they brought in Trump, right, and they're pushing Trump. And when that fell flat, all of a sudden, they all changed to disinformation, misinformation. And actually, people, most of that is domestic. Oh my! So we have to do something about this domestic misinformation. They immediately switched after 2018 and started to fund, with government money, with all of our tax dollars, these NGOs that then set up rating systems and then directly going to the tech companies and saying, you got to do something about this misinformation. So it was already going before COVID, and then COVID accelerated it. And now you're in a situation where this is just what they do. And if she wins, if Harris wins, I mean, for networks like this could be existential.
Well,